Hello and welcome to Shut Up and Sit Down Teaches Fury of Dracula, an absolutely awesome game with an awesome amount of rules. Fury of Dracula ships in addition to a manual with a rules reference, and this, quite simply, is an index where you can look up any part of the game you're having trouble with. This is a completely excellent resource and you should use it a lot. So, I'm going to assume that you've set up the game in accordance to the manual's setup diagram right here for your first game of Fury of Dracula. Once you've done that, I can start talking. So, this is a game where one player will be controlling Dracula, and between 2 and 4 other people are going to be trying to drive a stake through his horrible wizened heart. Now, it's a hidden movement game. What that means is that while the 4 hunter characters, and you always play with 4 hunters even if you have less players, are going to be running around the board and everyone can see exactly where they are, Dracula is not placed on the board. Rather, his location is indicated by a card down here, which is why this space is attached to here. This card is where Dracula is. He's currently in Vienna. Don't tell anyone. We'll get to Dracula later. And the game is the hunters pursuing him across Europe, trying to figure out where he is and fight him and hopefully win that fight. Dracula wins if he can get this influence track up to 13. This increases from him doing influential actions like creating vampires and some other stuff we'll get to later. So that's the game. The hunters want to kill Dracula. Dracula needs to survive until he can get that track to number 13. So here is how you play. A game of Fury of Dracula is divided into days and nights, just like real life. So when the game begins on Monday, in this day phase, every hunter will take 1 action, starting in their number. So we've got number 1, Lord Godalming, followed by 2, Dr. Seward, Van Helsing, and then Mina Harker. Once they've all done 1 action, we'll move on to night, and then they'll all do 1 more. And then in the dead of night, Dracula will move. And then we go back to day again. So here's what actions look like. And this is nice and easy because you have a rules reference right here next to every single character. You'll get one, it's your own, no one else can have it. So we're going to use Dr. John Seward here for our example. We're going to pop the rules next to him and I'm going to walk you through all the different actions a hunter can take in a day or night. So moving is the nice and simple one. You can move by road. That's easy. You just go along from one space to another connected by a red road. That's your action, you're done. Alternatively, you can go out to sea. Sea's a bit more complicated. You can spend your action going out into one of these large sea spaces, and then once you're at sea, you can do nothing because there's nothing to do. You're on a boat, except for move to adjacent sea spaces or move to ports once you're in a sea space where you want to go to. But let's say we don't want to go to sea because it sucks. You're in Marseille. Here's another action you can do. You can prepare for your encounter with Dracula. Now, if you're on a large space with a big old square, a city, that means you get the full shebang when you prepare. If we look up here, there are 2 decks. If you're in a large city, you get an item, and then you'll look at that and you'll stash that in your item limit. The limit of these cards is written on your sheet. That's how many of those you can hold before you have to start discarding. So in this case, we've got some sexy garlic, and then we'll get a sexy event, and we'll put that. And events can be played. You just follow the rules on the event card. Now, some of these cards have a bat. And if you search when there's a bat, instead of taking it, you simply throw it away. That's a card for Dracula. He acquires these through nefarious means. You just throw it away, hopefully revealing more hunter cards for you to claim in future. If, however, you're in a crappy small place like Geneva, which are these diamond-shaped things, they don't have shops, they don't have items. You only get to play with this deck. You only get the brown event stack. You do not get the item. So that's moving and revealing. You can also take a train ticket if you like. You can spend your action wherever you are acquiring a train ticket. You then reach into this randomized pile of train tickets up here. You acquire a train ticket, you look at it secretly, just like these cards, and then you're going to put it there, you're going to look at the number, and you're going to have that train ticket in secret. Train tickets are spent moving via the yellow and white train tracks on the board. So let's return to our buddy here in Geneva. If he does a move action and doesn't want to travel by the slow red roads, he can instead spend that train ticket token we got. If you are traveling exclusively by white train rails, which are Europe's good rail infrastructure, you use the white number. So if I was in Marseille, I could travel choo-choo all the way to Paris and then again to Le Havre. You have to spend the full number. You cannot travel 1 train space in this example. I would have to travel all 2, but it's pretty far. If you are traveling via yellow routes or a combination of yellow and white routes, you have to use the yellow number because the trains in Eastern Europe at this time were rubbish. That train token is then spent and returns to the pile and you mix it around. So, what other actions have we got? We've got reserving tickets and resting. Resting is nice and simple. You spend your entire action taking a damage if you've been damaged. You take that damage token off your sheet, exactly one damage token. So if poor John Stewart had been kind of bloodied and he took a rest action, he would only recover 1 damage. That's good because you don't want to die, frankly. You've also got special actions. Certain cards will refer to spending an action to utilize that card. You then spend your turn doing that. If you are in the same city as another hunter, you can spend an action trading items with that hunter. You cannot trade the brown-backed event cards. Now, this brings me on to something. This also enables you to show one another your cards in secret. You can go to that other hunter player and say, look, I've got some garlic and I've got this long night card, and that's nice. That's the only circumstance where you can do that in secret. Because here's the thing. In Fury of Dracula, Dracula knows everything. He's got spies everywhere. You cannot whisper to each other as hunters. If you think Dracula's in Paris, you have to declare so Dracula can hear it, I think Dracula's in Paris. If you've got garlic and you want other players to know it, Dracula has to know as well. You show to the table, I've got garlic. Unless you're in the same city, and then you can do that in secret. So all the hunters are going to do their fun actions. They're going to travel, they're going to search, they're going to get train tickets. Then you move this token on from day to night. And when that happens, all the hunters, again, in their order, printed in the top left corner of their card, take an action, except night is a bit different. You cannot travel at night. It's not safe, trains aren't running, that kind of thing. So when you take a night action, you can do anything except move. And here is the other thing. If you supply in a town at night, meaning you get that item in the card, you don't draw off the top of this brown deck. You draw off the bottom. And hopefully, that'll still have a nice grey hunter symbol for you, at which point you just get the card and you add that to your hand like everything else. But it might be a bat. And if it's a bat, you don't throw it away like you did in the day phase. That Dracula card goes straight all the way over here to Dracula, and it goes into Dracula's hand of cards. So that's the basics for the hunters. Hunters also do have special abilities. If we again return to Dr. John Stewart down here, all the hunters are a bit different and have special abilities printed on their cards. So if the rule on your hunter contradicts any rule that is ordinarily in the manual, you follow the rule on the hunter card. So that's the basics of the hunters. Now we've had a day and a night. When we move the clock onto from Monday to Tuesday, Dracula will move. Now let's move the main camera over and I'm going to walk you through what Dracula does. Welcome to the evil side of the board. So, as Dracula, the very first thing you're going to do on your turn is slide all of these cards showing where you are down a space, because you're moving, right? So let me just reveal secretly what that looks like. We're currently in Vienna, and we want to move out from Vienna. So what this means, as you might have assumed, is that Dracula has to move every turn. It's a pain in the ass. Where you move to is simply a case of you picking a card from this deck of all the locations and C's in the entire game in alphabetical order and go into that location. So I'm going to make this a little easier for you. Dracula's in Vienna. Vienna is here. So while you wouldn't put your miniature on the board, I'm going to put it here just to show how that works. You can only move via the red lines. Dracula is so old, he does not trust trains. That is a real joke from the old edition. So let's say we want to move from Vienna to Budapest. So Dracula would move along this red line. We would put this Budapest card face down here, because remember all these cards are face down, and then we would pick an encounter card from our hand of encounter cards. Dracula always has 5 of these. If he ever has less than 5, then he just draws cards from the deck to get more. So these are secret sort of like awful things that Dracula then seeds on that location. He leaves behind. He basically farts out these events. So we put the Budapest card down and we put the event card on top of it. And just like that, you end up creating a trail of encounters and places you've been. Now I'm going to point out the obvious problem here. Because those cards that you've been to are on the board, you cannot go back to those locations. Meaning, Dracula is basically playing a game of Snake. We've gone from Vienna to Budapest, which means now we can't go back to Vienna. If we move again, then we can't go to these 2 locations. So you kind of end up leaving a really long trail. Now, Let me demonstrate what happens when a hunter starts exploring. We've got Van Helsing here, I think. No, I don't even know. He's a knob, he's a jerk hunting an old man. Let's say he's in Prague and he moves into Vienna. Because that card is in your trail, then Dracula immediately has to go, yep, I've been here. And then we're going to reach here, and he would reveal the Vienna card. And now the game's afoot. This is Fury of Dracula, because they can see you're only one card away, which means you have to be in a city connected to Vienna. And he came from Prague, which means you could be in Zagreb or Munich or Budapest, and suddenly the net starts closing on Dracula. Here's the other thing that happens. Now Dracula has a choice. He can ambush this event card. He can just slingshot it into the hunter's face and go, there's a saboteur! And then the awful text in the white box will happen to the hunter. This is an option. Why wouldn't Dracula do that? Well, good question. Let's say Dracula leaves it face down and says, I'm not going to ambush you. That could be because that card is a vampire. In the encounter deck are vampire cards. And Dracula is trying to seed these in locations where the hunters won't find them and let them fall off the track, which is obviously going to take 7 turns. When vampires Dracula has created fall off the end of the track, which is referred to as maturing, you bump the influence track up. It is the big way that Dracula can accelerate the influence track towards the end of the game. When cards fall off this track, all of them then can, optionally, use the text in the yellow box down here. So for vampires, that will accelerate the influence track, but actually all encounters have a mature effect, which is pretty annoying for the hunters. So if you choose not to ambush with an encounter card, it could be because that card is a vampire, or it could be a double bluff. Because one of the other actions hunters can do that I didn't mention is they can search, which means this guy here with the gun says, I'm on Vienna, I'm going to spend my entire turn searching, and then he flips the card, and it's not a vampire, it's a saboteur. So the saboteur still fires in his face, and it's awful, but also he's wasted a turn doing it. So Dracula's playing a bluffing game. Let's say, though, that this guy with the gun didn't go to Vienna. He went to Budapest, which, let's not forget, is where we are. That's a disaster for Dracula. Dracula then goes, yep, I'm in Budapest. He flips the card up. He fires the encounter card if he wants to. Then you take this miniature and place it in Budapest. So a fight does not happen immediately. And fighting is just about the final rule in Fury of Dracula. You've done great for getting this far. A fight doesn't break out immediately. It will break out at dawn or dusk, which is when the clock token travels from a white square to a black square. It's at these instance, if hunters are in the same space as Dracula, that a fight breaks out. Meaning, hunters have a chance, perhaps, to catch sudden last-minute trains so more than one person can get on that same space and a bunch of people can beat up on Dracula. The first thing that happens in a fight is the hunter collects this rubbish deck of the rubbish things they can do in a fight, which is dodge, punch, and escape. They're going to take those cards. Meanwhile, Dracula is going to take the giant Dracula combat deck and place it right there. Now, Dracula is going to deal themselves 5 cards off the top of the deck, while the hunter takes those rubbish combat cards that they always have and is going to add any items they've got to that stack. Okay? Then the fight proceeds as follows. Dracula will look at those 5 cards and, oh, this is rubbish. We'll select something. And then the hunter will look at their cards and select something. And then both cards are simultaneously revealed. In this case, the hunter is punching and Dracula's plotting, which is an extremely awful combination. So now what happens here is you look on the hunter card and see if they can match the symbol that is on Dracula's card. In this case, they can. That little plotting fan of cards is here, meaning Dracula's card is cancelled. So Dracula tries to plot, the hunter punches him, which is, a good enough reason that a plot should be cancelled. And then you would, if the card hasn't been cancelled, so let's say the hunter instead dodged, the Dracula card would fire, and then the hunter card would fire. If he punches, the Dracula card is cancelled, meaning this card does not fire, and the hunter card fires. And by firing, I just mean the text on the card happens. So in collecting items, you're trying to amass a greater variety of symbols. There are a few cards in this Dracula deck I'm going to point out now, so they're not awful surprises. Dracula can mesmerize you, at which point all of your weapons aren't going to do much damage. He can fang you, and if he fangs you after mesmerizing you, you can become permanently bitten, which means your cards are partially placed face up where Dracula can see them, because he's inside your head. But most importantly of all, some of the Dracula cards are just escaping. Escape as bat, escape as missed, and then he's escaped. So hopefully you'll do a bit of damage to him and then he'll limp away from a fight. And if you can get him in enough fights where you do enough damage, you'll tick him over that 15 damage and then he will die. Because as we all know from the books, once Dracula takes his 15th point of damage, he dies. What happens though if multiple hunters are in the same space as Dracula or a vampire? Because you actually have to go through this whole fighting procedure if you want to kill Dracula's vampires. Well, basically, the vampire is going to get screwed real bad. What happens, let's say we've got 2 hunters here facing off against Dracula. Combat's exactly the same. Dracula plays a card, and both of the hunters will play a card face down. And then, and of course this is true if you have like 3 hunters taking on Dracula at the same time, Dracula simply picks one hunter he's playing his card to, and you do a perfectly ordinary round of combat with those cards where they may or may not cancel each other. And then the other 2 hunters' cards just happen. They can just shoot or knife or punch Dracula as much as they want. It's a complete disaster. This is a good time to mention, on Dracula's sheet is a Pride ability. And Pride is a means whereby Dracula cannot escape from combat for a certain number of turns. And the longer the game goes on, the longer Dracula has to wait before he can flee combat. This is a good time to mention Despair, not in general at this game, but Despair tokens. So, every time you complete a full week in Fury of Dracula, Dracula is going to place a Despair token of their choice, because you can have a mouth or eyes, on that clock. And a Despair token does a couple of things. First off, it's going to lengthen how long Dracula has to wait before he can escape. But also, if Dracula defeats a hunter, if Dracula pours damage onto a hunter to the point that that hunter has maxed out their damage, then Dracula is going to get more and more influence depending on the number of Despair tokens. All this is written in cards. You'll know it when you see it. If a hunter is defeated, it's nice and simple. Let's say in this fight, a hunter is defeated. That's actually nice and useful because there's a hospital in town. There are 2 hospitals in the board. 2 things happen when a hunter is defeated. First off, you wipe everything off their player board. You wipe off cards they're holding, you wipe off bites, you wipe off damage. Then they go to hospital, the nearest hospital. If it's equidistant, Dracula chooses. Then, for an action on their next turn, they can walk out of the hospital into town. You see how these spaces are connected? You actually have to walk for an action, meaning it takes ages to get out the hospital doors. Maybe you have to escape because they won't let you leave. And that's Fury of Dracula. Just 3 tiny things before you can get started. First off, Dracula has this fabulous postcard of Europe, and the purpose of this is so that the hunters can't watch where he's looking or she is looking on the map and just figure out where they are. Dracula can instead peruse their postcard so that they don't give anything away. Another thing, there are any number of these tokens down in the corner, storms and misinformation and roadblocks and stuff, and certain cards will tell you to put those on the board. I'm not going to teach them because actually in the manual is a nice page explaining what every single one of them does, and you can learn that as and when those tokens become relevant. Third and finally, there was something.
Ally!
Allies! God, the final rule of the game. Thank you, Mr. Lees. Certain cards in this event deck are labelled as allies, and that is nice and simple. When somebody plays them, they join this tiny little ally slot right there. You can only have 1 ally at a time. So playing another ally for the hunters eliminates whatever ally was in that space before. And Dracula is exactly the same, though I don't think he actually gets a space on the board for it. Dracula can have 1 ally, and that goes face up in Dracula's area. And then if Dracula wants to play another ally at a later point, it covers out that ally. We've just gone to finish this Learn How to Play video, and we've remembered there are 2 more rules you should probably know about. Like I say, this game is a little tricky. The first rule you should know about is what happens when Dracula goes out to sea. Because Dracula might not trust trains, he does trust boats. However, being a vampire, he hates them, apparently. When Dracula moves from a port to a sea space, which I will point out is blue, so hunters do know he's gone to sea, or she, I don't know if I should gender Dracula, it's weird. Dracula just takes 2 damage the instant he goes into water. And when Dracula plays another sea card, indicating he's moving from a sea to a sea, he takes 1 more damage and will continue taking damage for as long as he's at sea. So chasing Dracula out to sea, that's a valid tactic. Final thing, if Dracula is revealed to have made a mistake, so you flip these cards and you realise, hey, hang on, that sea isn't even connected to this, and you realise that Dracula was playing illegally, because in most board games you can catch when players do something wrong. Dracula, of course, is playing the game by himself. So if he misremembers something, then no one's there to save him. Dracula just gets a massive penalty. Dracula takes 5 damage. All the cards are cleared off the track as well. So yeah, don't let that happen because it's really bad. But again, that's in the game's lovely index. Fans of Fury of Dracula, of course, will know that this isn't the entire game. There are actually a load of really awesome advanced rules like layers and power cards that Dracula gets and rumor tokens, all kinds of fun stuff. But good news for me, I am not going to explain those to you because you should really introduce those only once you've played a full game of Fury of Dracula, because otherwise, well, you're just going to be very, very confused. So finish your first game, have an awesome time, and then, and only then, refer to all the extra rules hidden at the back of the Learn to Play booklet. Thank you very much, guys. Have a great time hunting an old man.